Al Jazeera Zeina, as you can see, is out on the streets among the demonstrators. Zeina, bring us up to speed with what's been happening there and where you are.
Well, we are in Martyrs Square, which really is the epicenter of the protest movement. You can see tear gas falling, security forces trying to disperse the crowd because Parliament building is not very far from where we are standing, approximately 200-300 meters from where we are. Because of the water cannons, because of the tear gas, protesters had no choice but to move towards Martyrs Square, where we are now. Running battles in the streets. We've seen more and more incidents like this over recent days as anger grows, as frustration grows. You can see it's very difficult for us to approach at the moment because we're not wearing any gas masks, but the smell really of tear gas has engulfed this whole area in downtown Beirut. This is the heart of the Lebanese capital. A few days ago, there were incidents of violence outside a police barracks where security forces were holding a number of activists who are protesting the detention of their friends. The day before that, Hamra Street, a commercial district in the capital, was a war zone. So Lebanon, really, the economy is in near collapse, and that is why you are seeing this people returning to the streets, this escalation. We are day 5 of the so-called Week of Rage, which activists announced on Tuesday. They promised to step up protest action to force those in power to resign. But the biggest question is protests like this going to be enough to force them to leave power, to give up political power, which they have held for 3 decades? Most of those politicians in power were warlords during Lebanon's civil war. So as you can see, it's a war zone. The center of Beirut is a war zone as protesters continue to insist to try to confront security forces.
How big are this crowd of protesters? How, in number, how does it compare to those who were out on the streets in the early days of the protests 4 months ago?
Adrian, in the early days of the protest movement, there were tens of thousands of people. It was a nationwide protest, cross-sectarian, and that is really what made it very, very different. People from various sects coming together across the country. But the numbers really were not enough to tilt the balance in favor of the street, because the mainly sectarian political parties who are in power still have supporters. People who continue to support those parties for 2 reasons, either ideological reasons or reasons where they benefit from those parties. These politicians give them jobs, especially in the public sector. So yes, people are calling this an uprising against the political class, to force the political class, which has been in power for decades, really, to leave. But there is an equal number of people who still remain in their homes, who still want to support those in power, because they either, like I told you, they either benefit from them or for ideological reasons they still support them. Others are afraid of the alternative because this leaderless protest movement has not really presented much of an alternative apart from one. We want a transitional government, an independent government that will govern the country until early elections. So there are still a lot of people who are still not convinced on what this protest action will achieve, whether it will just create more anarchy in the country.
The police have been firing tear gas canisters and using water cannon against the protesters. The protesters themselves, though, appear to have come prepared for trouble. I mean, they're throwing fireworks. You can hear them going off in the background there. How did the trouble start? Did the police fire first? Did the protesters come looking for trouble?
No, we were watching this live on television. Protesters were attempting to break the security barrier outside Parliament building. They were provoking the security forces. They were throwing firecrackers, stones, and security forces responded. The internal security forces also released a statement an hour ago calling on what they call, quote, the peaceful protesters to leave the area if they do not want to get hurt. What the internal security forces is saying is that what they believe is that there are some infiltrators who want to instigate violence, and they do not want the peaceful protesters to be caught up in the middle of this chaos. But people have been bussed in from other areas. Today, the protest action was, quote, it was being called a crawl to parliament. They called on people from across the country to get on buses, to get in their cars, and to converge here in downtown Beirut, outside Parliament Square, to put the pressure, to maintain the pressure on the political elite to leave office. So a lot of people who are here, and I must say, we are still in a few thousand. I wouldn't say more than a few thousand. They came here to really to do something. A lot of people are saying, well, our peaceful protests are not getting anywhere. Those in power are not listening to us. They're not listening to our demands. They're not listening to our concerns. We are becoming more poor. We aren't able to survive. We're losing our jobs. The unemployment rate is on the rise. People have no other choice but to find a way out of the country, which they don't want to do. So this is why you're seeing this escalation in the past few days. Now, we cannot not discuss what is going on the political level, because first of all, there's a political vacuum in the country. The Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri, he resigned back in October amid the nationwide protests. In mid-December, a new Prime Minister was appointed, but he was appointed by the ruling alliance. And since then, it's been a month, he hasn't been able to form a government. And the differences among the politicians are within the ruling alliance itself. Opposition parties have already made clear they have no interest in being a part of the next cabinet. They are saying that they're going to heed the call of the street, and they don't want any ministers in the next government. So now the politicians who are bickering over seats come from the ruling alliance, and they're bickering with the man they appointed. They no longer want him. So some people who are in the streets today are supporters of the ruling alliance who would like to put pressure on the man they appointed, Hassan Diab, to leave office. It's a very complicated picture, and that's Lebanon. It's the sectarian-based political system. It's very hard for the different sects to come together where everyone feels that they are a part of the nation, because when a certain sect feels marginalized, then that is where you see them take protest action in the streets.
As you say, a complicated picture, and that's Lebanon. Al Jazeera's Zeina out on the streets there in central Beirut. Zeina, we'll be back with you a little later. Let's bring in Rami Khouri, journalism professor at the American University of Beirut. He joins us now via Skype from Beirut. Rami, quite remarkable scenes there in the center of town. What do you make of this?
This is an important turning point in this whole uprising, revolution, as the protesters call it. A few days ago, there was a pretty clear movement towards forming a new government. Hassan Diab had picked 18 allegedly independent, technocratic people to become ministers. And then the protesters discovered that, in fact, 6 or 7 of these were very close to one of the political parties in the new government. And they were very upset. People were very upset that they thought they were being taken for a ride, that, in fact, this new government of alleged technocrats was really just a smokescreen for the old ruling oligarchic elite. And the arguments between them, as Zeina said, was about who was going to get the share of government portfolios that they expect. So the protesters were really upset. And then at the same time, about 2-3 nights ago, you had some small protests, just a couple of hundred people in Hamra Street. Hamra Street is like the Oxford Street or the Regent Street of Beirut. It's a very famous old commercial center. And the people, some demonstrators were out in front of the central bank, others were smashing bank windows and smashing a couple of ATM machines. And this seemed to have struck a chord with the political elite, that the banks were actually being hit as a symbol, because the banks have become a symbol for everything that's wrong in Lebanon, because people can't get their money in their own accounts. They're not allowed to take out all their money or even much of it. I just went to the bank this morning and took out my weekly $300 and 500,000 Lebanese, which is around maybe $200 in Lebanese. You're allowed a certain amount every week to take out from your own account. So the protesters have gotten really angry, and the political elite has struck back. So this is a high tension moment in Lebanon, mainly frustration by all sides that we're getting nowhere. And in the meantime, as Zeina said, everybody is suffering. Ordinary people can't get their money. People are losing jobs. Prices are rising. And basic things that people have to do, like have medical operations or pay their children's education fees, they're having trouble or they can't do it. So there's a real sort of existential fear among many people. In the meantime, daily life goes on. People go to work, people go to their religious centers, people go to school, but there's a lot of tension. And probably the big change in the last week has been the willingness of the authorities to use force on the street to break up demonstrators. The authorities say that they're just trying to stop these hooligans who are going out to cause trouble.
Yeah, you say that right at the beginning of that answer, you said that this is a turning point. In what way? I mean, apart from registering people's anger, and as you say, causing trouble, it seems that these protesters have come to prepared for trouble. In what way is this a turning point then? What can this achieve?
Well, it's a turning point because I think it shows us the continually rising fear among both parties, the ordinary people who are out protesting and the political elite that is trying to maintain its hold on power using the formation of the new government, which is supposed to be a technocratic independent government, but using that to essentially cement and maintain the hold on government and power and privilege that they have had for decades and decades. So both sides are really worried about what's going on, and they want to try to achieve their own goals. The turning point is that there's been an escalation in both the protests, all of which are peaceful, except for a few occasional troublemakers who, and nobody knows if these troublemakers are sent by some of the political forces to stir things up, or if they're just a bunch of young kids who are, like in all situations like this, they go out and they destroy things. But both the demonstrators and the political elite are frightened, and they're acting in this way. But the new element is the willingness of the authorities to use force to, as they say, maintain public order. And of course, everybody wants to maintain public order. When bank machines were being smashed and bank facades were being glass facades were being smashed, that kind of scared a lot of people. And people were starting to worry, maybe even I'm not going to be able to get my $300 a week now if this goes on. But today's demonstration was supposed to be the culmination of a week of anger, as it was called, a week of rage. And people were coming in on buses early in the morning from the north and the south, from all over the country. So I would anticipate that we're going to see tomorrow some more large-scale demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, as they mostly have been, and I wouldn't be surprised if they call a curfew or something, or they prevent demonstrations downtown, because this is really scaring people when you get this level of violence. Even though the numbers are relatively small, we're not talking of thousands and thousands of people who are shooting each other. You've got probably a couple of hundred people who are out on the front lines throwing stuff at the police, and then the police firing back. People also were upset by the manner in which the police have put down the demonstrations. 2-3 nights ago, about 50, 60 young people were arrested. There was videos of them being dragged in the street. They were taken to police stations and arrested for a couple of nights. People then went to the police stations and peacefully demonstrated outside, demanding to get these people out. A few reporters were beaten up, and they were in hospitals. They were filmed in the hospital. And again, none of this was earth-shaking stuff, but it was quite dramatic and relatively new, and that's why you're seeing what you're seeing now.
Professor, it's always good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed, Rami Khouri there in Beirut. Thank you for your insight. Al Jazeera's Zeina Khodr is out among that chaos that we've been watching. There she is. Zeina, what's going on around you right now?
Well, we are in the center, really, of Martyrs Square. We are forced to move back because now tear gas is landing here. So security forces really seem to be very determined to clear this whole area from the protesters. As you can see, a few hundred people remain, people who were initially outside the Parliament building. They attempted to storm Parliament building when security forces responded with tear gas and water cannon. So people are now in Martyrs Square, tear gas landing close by. We also understand that the other side of the square, what is known as Riyadh al-Sulah Square, outside the government palace, there too there are running battles between security forces and protesters. So as you can see, the state is determined to end this protest action, but protesters themselves are fighting back. That was firecrackers. This is how protesters are fighting back. People here really are very, very determined, and they've come from across Lebanon. They're not just people who live in Beirut. Into min wain? Okay, and some people min mahallet tanin? He's saying that I'm among a crowd of protesters trying to find out where these people are from and how they feel what is happening. But people seem here very, very determined to continue their protest action because they have lost faith in the state. They've lost trust in the state. They've lost trust in their politicians who are bickering amongst themselves on deciding who gets what ministry instead of solving the economic crisis in the country. The country is in near economic collapse. For the first time in 2 decades, the Lebanese pound, the local currency, devalued on the black market up to 50% of the value of the Lebanese pound, which means its purchasing power. It affected its. It means that the purchasing power of the Lebanese, it has lost purchasing power, and so people can no longer afford. It's becoming very, very difficult. And you heard what Rami said earlier. People cannot access their savings. They cannot access their deposits in the bank. I'm sorry, we have to move a bit back in order to be able to talk and breathe because of the smell of tear gas. So people feel that the banks are robbing them, that the state is robbing them from their own money. And this is why you're seeing this escalation over the past few days. Yes, there was a lull. There was a lull for a few weeks. There are a number of reasons why there was a brief lull in this uprising, or what people here, if you ask them, they call it their revolution. They say that Jazeera,
welcome.
Thank you. People holding sticks. It's tense. It's tense. People feel some local media side with another, and that's why they tend to ask, who do you work for? So we have to keep moving back. We have to keep moving back. Yeah, so Adrian, it's tense times in Lebanon.
Zeina, as you say, this is the culmination of a... This is a culmination of a week of protests, a week of rage. Talk us through what has happened throughout this week.
Well, over the past week, I'm sorry, Adrian, it's very difficult to speak. Shabab.
Zeina, if you need some time, that's okay. I think let me talk for a while. Obviously, there's a lot of tear gas in the air down there in central Beirut, and it's very difficult to breathe. Zeina and her crew are trying to move away from the epicenter of those protests, where all the tear gas is. it's still, there's so much tear gas in the air that it's still pretty hard to walk and talk to us at the same time. But these then live pictures from central Beirut, excuse me, where police have been firing tear gas and water cannon at protesters for quite a few hours now. Those protesters have been demanding a speedy resolution to the country's financial and economic crisis. Hundreds, possibly thousands, Zeina was saying, of people are involved in running battles with security forces. The demonstrators displaying their anger, as we were hearing from Rami Khouri a little earlier, over plans by the ruling party to form a government which is essentially made up of those from the current political class. It comes at the end, the culmination of a week of rage after there'd been a lull in these 4 months protests, 4 months of protests now in Beirut, and it appears that frustration is boiling over, and it appears very much as though the protesters tonight on the streets of Beirut had come prepared for trouble, looking for trouble, because as Zeina was saying, and Rami Khouri a little earlier, that people are so frustrated. People are losing jobs. They can't even access their own money in the banks there. Banks are limiting withdrawals of cash. Professor Khouri was telling us that he'd been today to withdraw his $500 worth of cash, and that's all that he's allowed to have for a week. So once again, live pictures from downtown Beirut, where what we're looking at here, I think, are fireworks being thrown by the protesters at the police, who've responded with tear gas and water cannon and the ubiquitous laser pens. They're streaking through the sky, I mean, illuminating the tear gas. You can see how much tear gas is in the sky. We've got Zeina back. Zeina, we've just got, can you hear me, Zeina? A couple of moments before we need to take a break. Hopefully the air's a little clearer where you are now.
Yes. Yes, apologies, Adrian. As you can imagine, it's very hard to speak and breathe, really, because of the smell of tear gas. We're now on the edge of Martyrs Square, where most of the protesters are now. The security forces really using a lot of tear gas to try to disperse the crowd, to move them away from this whole area. It's not clear if people are how long these running battles will continue. We've seen scenes like this over the past few days. In other neighborhoods of Beirut, they usually last for a few hours before security forces are able to contain the unrest. In previous occasions, security forces did not just use tear gas and water cannon. They used excessive force. They beat up protesters, they made arrests, and they really came under a lot of criticism by human rights groups that they used excessive force to disperse the crowds. This really is a message from those in power that we will not allow you to storm public buildings, we will not allow you to destabilize the situation. But Lebanon is already destabilized. There is a political vacuum, there's economic turmoil. As you can hear, the ambulances coming in and going out. We understand a lot of riot police, anti-riot police, were injured during the confrontations. Why are you here? Perla, you've been here since day one. Why this escalation now? We've seen you here since October 17. You haven't left the streets. Why?
Because we don't have social justice in this country. We have nothing. Life at this point is it's not worth living if this doesn't change. And we are in an economical crisis. Our system has, they've just proved themselves how much of a failure they are in every single way. We have no ministry working. We have nothing. We have nothing. People are dying.
But do you think this?
Whose phone is this?
Do you think that any change can happen?
There's no other way. It's been almost 100 days. Nobody's listening. They're still forming the same shitty government.
Please, let's not use
I'm
curse
sorry,
words.
but this is how it is. We don't want to use a cursing word, but
We
what
won't.
they've been doing is crime. They're criminals. We are ruled by criminals. They're warlords. They've done the civil war, and they're still sectoring us.
Okay, but do you really think, I mean, do you have all the support that you need? I mean, there are still people who
we don't.
support those in power. How would you how are you going to convince them to side with you in order
They're gonna get poor enough soon. We are in an economical crisis. Everybody's gonna get hungry. Everybody's gonna eat their leaders soon enough. I don't have to convince anybody about what's happening today. It's clear what's happening. Who can get a hold of their money in the banks? Who has electricity in their homes? Who has water? How can you breathe this oxygen that we're breathing now? How could you breathe it? We've seen everything burning and going down to the ground. And they're still sitting delusional. We have the delusional people. They go up, they say their speech.
But the argument is you cannot topple the result of a parliamentary election that happened in 2018 from the streets.
Where we saw most of the votings in the trash bins. I have people who can come and prove, people who actually were voted to be MP and who woke up and they're no longer MPs.
What are you promising next? I mean, they're fighting back. What can you do next? I mean, here with all of your friends, what are you going to do next?
As you said, we keep on fighting. We cannot stand like this, seeing the people, the politicians doing nothing. We have a shit.
No, please, let's not use curse words.
An economic situation that we cannot. We have no more. We cannot find work. We cannot do anything.
With 5,000 years of history, it is an amazing country. They took everything. We have nothing left. This is why our only option is to go down on the street and ask if it's with violence. We have to use violence. We are fighting a 40-year corrupted government in money laundering, drug trafficking of drugs, of weapons.
There's a lot of accusations.
No, it's not. I don't know. If you're Lebanon, you would not say that. It is, and I will say it again. This is the actual reality of Lebanon. This is not an accusation. Whoever lived here.
But when you just watch this, and they're fighting.
There's no war without sacrifice.
They are suffering.
Without collateral damage. We cannot win if we don't lose. We have to lose. We have to sacrifice. We have to spill.
Hit rock bottom.
Roar back to stand back up.
When you first took to the streets, I remember you were all chanting, peaceful, peaceful. This is
We never wanted confrontation.
And this is why
we are people who worked. Like we are people. He's a father. I'm an artist. Like it's not. We didn't want to confront, nor we can confront. Like today, I was putting my cast, and I didn't know how to do it. I looked at the cop. I'm like, damn you! I don't even know how to put my defensive gear on you.
We have tried peacefully. We have tried with starting. It's not working. They did like this.
It's been like 100 days on the streets. Where are the politicians?
So, Adrian, as you can see,
look at this.
people are angry,
Look at
and now more and more are talking about the need to resort to violence in order to achieve their goals. At the beginning, I do remember, and I used to see these same protesters in the street saying that the only way forward is to use peaceful means. We are not going to be drawn into any conflict, but you can see the anger. People don't feel that they have any future in their own country, accusing really the politicians of taking from the people and not giving anything in return. There's barely any basic services in this country. They mentioned the electricity. Nobody has full-time electricity. People are forced to pay 2 bills. You have to pay a private generator company in order to have electricity in your home. And let's just remember what triggered this protest movement on October the 17th. There was a proposal to tax WhatsApp calls, which should be free. And that really was the tipping point for many people. Especially it came just a few days after wildfires. The authorities were unable to put out wildfires because the equipment, they didn't have the emergency equipment they needed to do that. So Adrian, you can see the anger for yourselves. People expressing their frustration and they're growing impatient with the politicians in power.
Al Jazeera's Zeina reporting live from central Beirut. For the moment, Zeina, many thanks indeed if you've just joined us. This is Al Jazeera with continuing coverage of events in central Beirut, where police are firing tear gas and water cannon at protesters who are demanding a speedy resolution to the country's financial and economic crisis. Hundreds of protesters have been involved in running battles with security forces. The demonstrators angry over plans by the ruling party to form a government from the current political class. Joining us now on the line is one of those protesters, Mia Atui. Mia, we spoke to you, some 50 minutes ago. Where are you right now? What's going on around you?
Right now, I'm next to Taipei. It's a few meters up. The protesters have moved significantly from the area of nearby the parliament, and right now, everybody has scattered in the areas next to the mosque. A plan to move towards possibly Nizmi Square, which is at the other side of the parliament. The tear gas bombs were too much to handle. The protesters had to really move significantly from the area we were. There was a lot of people who were fainting due to the tear gases, and the police were chasing some of the protesters into different alleyways nearby the parliament area next to a Nahar newspaper. The protesters now are in different squares trying to recover from the tear gas bomb with an intention to go back in once things have calmed down a little bit, but definitely the chasing between the police and the protesters continue.
Mia, why are people so angry there in Beirut tonight?
I think there have been several people who have just commented on this, but it's been 94 days. There has been no response from the government with regards to the protests, to the demands of this revolution. And continuously, the government there are plans to form a government that does not fit with the demands that the people have been speaking about for the last 94 days. People are becoming more and more economically deficient every day. People are starving, people are hungry, people are angry at the situations that we're living in. While we were down there, we were hearing that actually they were spending so much water with the water jets throwing on us, and there are people who haven't received any water to their homes for the past 8 days in the area of Beirut. Not to mention all of the other rights, basic human rights that people are not receiving in this country, from water to health care to electricity. So really people have, all of this has been accumulating for a really long time right now. And people are seeing that this is their only chance to get the rights and from the government.
How long are you prepared to stay out on the streets, Mia?
We're staying here for a few more hours, I guess, until we can no longer hold the ground. But for so far, the numbers have been enormous. Usually, when these kinds of things happen, protesters tend to shy away from the violence that's taking place right now. But you're still seeing hundreds of people still holding the ground till now.
All right, Mia, many thanks indeed. Mia Atui there, one of the protesters that you can see on the streets there of Beirut, the streets that are thick with tear gas and the smoke from fireworks that are being thrown by the protesters. Still with us is Rami Khouri, journalism professor at the American University of Beirut. He's with us via Skype from the city. What did you make of what we've heard in the last 15 minutes or so? Those protesters saying that life is not worth living, they've nothing left to lose, they took everything. And what Mia was saying just a moment or two ago, they've got water for the water cannon, but not for people's homes in Beirut.
Yes, that's right. And this is typical of what many of the protesters are saying, and not just the young people out on the streets, but a lot of middle-aged and older people and people all over the country are really totally exasperated by what they feel is the disdain by which their own government treats them. That we've had this terrible crisis economically now for months and months, but there's been 3 months of protests, and there are very few statements by government ministers talking about the economy, the value of the Lebanese lira, essential issues. The government barely talks to the people, and this is what angers them. People have this sense of not just helplessness, but almost dehumanization, that they're not treated like human beings by their own government. It's not a, foreign occupying power or a colonizing power or military invasion from abroad, which happens all over the region and has happened here. This is your own people in your own country. So you have really now this incredible convergence of two very strong forces, the anger, rage, and desperation of probably a majority of the population, though they're not all out on the streets. And at the same time, the same kind of fear among the political elite that desperately wants to stay in power and is trying to carry out policies that they think will help them stay in power if they make just symbolic reforms and changes. And you can see it in the symbolism of the slogans. There was demonstrations. I attended a few to see what's going on the other day near the university. And the slogans that people use, they say, down with the rule of the security state, down with the rule of the banks, down with the rule of the central bank. They're really expressing extreme anger at these authorities who they see as being in cahoots with each other, the banking system and the political elite working together. It's hard to tell where this is going to go. By the way, what you're seeing in Lebanon is very typical of what you're seeing in Iraq, in Sudan, in Algeria, and in other Arab countries where you have similar situations, each one a little bit different, particular in its own situation, but the driving forces of political anger, economic stress, and psychological dehumanization, those forces are all common throughout this region. And that's why you've got demonstrations going on now, almost nonstop for the last 9-10 years across the majority of Arab countries. And it's really the question of who has authority, who sets the rules, and who benefits from the government system. And this is not going to be decided on the streets ultimately. It's going to be decided in a political showdown. And nobody knows how it's going to turn out in Lebanon. What you need is a serious mediator here to step in, as happened in Sudan. And Sudan made a incredible transformation with a governing council which has one more civilian member than military, and this is historic. Lebanon is going to have to go through something similar where the political elite and the citizens come to some agreement about how to make a transition now to resolve the pressing economic and technical issues like energy, garbage, water, let alone jobs or the value of your money. All of these each one of these is a big issue, and they're all pressing on people simultaneously. And when people see that the government is able to be so decisive when it comes to putting down protests, but is totally undecisive in terms of addressing the real stresses that impact the millions of people, that's what really gets them angry.